Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Hospitable Host podcast. I'm Miles Hobson, Head of Marketing here at Hospitable, and I'm your host for today. Today we are speaking with Stacey Olson, Director of Sustainable Design at Gensler, the world's largest architecture and design firm. As a global wellness leader, Stacey works at the highest level of real estate, helping brands understand how buildings can actually make people healthier. She's an expert on the art and science of bringing nature indoors, and she understands exactly why wellness real estate is currently commanding the highest premiums in the market. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Okay, hello, Stacey. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So obviously, we're here today to kind of talk about sustainable design and wellness as well. We'd love to kind of get your take on a home designed for wellness versus kind of just a beautiful home. Do you see kind of almost like a premium when it comes to selling that property and or kind of renting it out as a short-term rental?
hmm hmm Yeah, it's funny because it kind of begets the question, what's the return on investment
Yeah.
for wellness design or sustainability? And we get this question all the time, but we're actually seeing that, and it's not even new, but it's starting to become more well-known mainstream that look, the definition of luxury or quality or desirability, it really just assumes that you're already meeting the beautiful, the experiential, right? So what today's what today people are looking for is, well, what are you giving me on top of that? And that really creates that differentiation, that brand recognition, or that brand experience, whatever you want to call it. So really, it's about like creating wellness integration as a matter of baseline these days. And if we don't have that, well, then we're just really not contending with what the industry, and by industry I mean really just the expectation is of what people are looking for. So the actual ROI is very difficult to quantify, but if you don't embed these kind of basic sustainability and wellness best practices, you're not going to be attracting that kind of a buyer that is really looking for that luxury or that experiential space.
Nice. Okay. And you kind of touched on there, kind of some core concepts.
hmm
Like, what are some of the core concepts? Like, when we think about this kind of wellness and design and sustainable design, like, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about doing in our own kind of apartments or cabins or cottages and that kind of thing?
hmm hmm Yeah, so if you're thinking about this for yourself, right, like a DUI versus as a person that is selling a product to for as a part of their business strategies, it's a little bit different. But if we think about, well, ultimately you want to have comfort in your home, right? If we're thinking about residential space. And so, how what does that means is going to be different for different people. And we talk a lot about something called inclusive design. And so when we think about, everyone is coming to, this space with a different set of experiences, cultures, gender identities, family sizes, animals, marital status, right? All of those things are going to inform what you're really looking for. So there really truly is no one size fits all. But when we think about it through the lens of, like, how do I bring calm and my own personal culture into my residence? It's dependent on all of those different things that make you and your family who you are. And so again, that's very different. But at the core of it, we're really thinking about home as a sanctuary. And so if your home is your sanctuary, how do you create that calming environment for you? And some people, get really, jazzed up by um, you know, um, different things, right? Like, we think about um, low sensory versus high sensory, or acoustics, or tactile nature of things, right? There are going to be different components that resonate to different people, which is actually why I think it's really important to think about the all 14 patterns of the biophilic design, right? When we think about how those want to manifest for each of us is a little bit different.
Nice. Okay. And you mentioned their biophilic design as well. Can you maybe define that for us? What exactly it is? I mean, it's biophilic is obviously to do with kind of biology, and I think some people might think, well, we're just talking about putting in more houseplants, but it's obviously a lot more than that. Maybe you can kind of define that for the audience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's really great resources out there, easy to find. But so there's 14 patterns of biophilic design. I didn't make it up. It's something that Tara Pitt Green put out many moons ago. But it still is scientifically founded and very applicable to everyday design and experience that we have today. But fundamentally, it means the love of life, and what we associate that with is the love of nature. And we know there's a ton of scientific data out there that shows the physical manifestations of and positive impacts that nature has on our bodies. Everything from improving blood flow circulation, improving heart health, reducing stress hormones. And so bringing biophilia in different ways can be really powerful to thinking about creating that calm, nurturing sanctuary that we all want to have. And within those 14 patterns, some of them are kind of what we would immediately think, and kind of what you said, right? That there's plants, like actual living plant matter, or even thinking of like animals, or like koi pond, right? All of that is like living nature. But some of it is really more a little bit esoteric, a little bit more you know um, not obvious. So when we think about things like the way that light might, reflect off of a screen and create some kind of shadow space, and it might be a pattern, or you might have like a wall covering or something that, or a painted mural that evokes nature, but isn't actually, alive in itself, or I really like the one of the 14 patterns, which is the idea of prospect and refuge. And that's thinking about, for example, how do I have spaces in my environment that, are that in the path there inspires delight and joy and awe. And so it makes me want to go there, right? Maybe there's like lighting in a way that, makes you want to go explore what's around that corner. And that actually helps create what we call these like dopamine bursts, where when we think about how our brain works, we're kind of pre-wired to constantly be searching for things. That's one of the downfalls of actually of technology, where we're constantly hooked to this technology, giving us these notifications, and we always, well, what's next? What's next? But it's fundamentally within our biology that we want to go see what's out there, what's next. And so, designing for that is gives you a little bit of a burst of enjoyment and a little bit of fun in your day. And the inverse of that, or contrastingly, would be like like the refuge. How can I go to a space where I can hide away, like my cave, right? I can have my coffee or my tea and my book, and maybe I can look out and see what's going on, but I don't have to participate in it if I don't want to. So those kind of ideas are don't necessarily have to really cost anything. It's really thinking about how you can design your space to create these little nooks and crannies that, allow you to pivot throughout the day as you want to.
Nice. And I mean, it sounds like so biophilic design can actually be something that I guess creates a dopamine hit when you're looking on Airbnb, essentially, right? So
Uh-huh.
as potential guests are scrolling, they can see these kind of beautifully designed places that attract them and encourage them to book as well, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Finding, ways to, evoke interest, I mean, that's kind of the crux of marketing, right?
Mm.
How do you create experiences that are relatable to people of all different cultures, right? And so, you want to think about coming back to the core of our DNA and, what is it that would everyone might be, find like, ooh, what's around that corner? And ooh, that looks cozy, right? That's just innately in our biology. Those are things that you can rip on.
Nice. Okay. And you're obviously an expert in sustainability and sustainable design as well. We'd love to kind of talk about kind of the circular economy and how hosts can maybe think about, how can they, furnish or renovate a property in a more sustainable way,
Mhm.
maybe through upcycling or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of upcycling. If you're going through a renovation of any kind, taking some inventory and finding out what the existing materials are, and maybe it's a it's something that there's a wood wall covering or something is a little dated, and you think, oh gosh, oh, I don't know if I can use that, but could you repurpose that? Maybe wall covering is not the right example, but if it's a wood paneling or something, could
Mhm.
you refinish that and use it? I actually did something like that in my house where there was some extra wood we didn't wasn't useful, but then made it into a frame around a mirror, and it became a very nice, like throwback to the previous construction, but was able to like also have a kind of a more polished look on it instead of just like the mirror, and I didn't have to buy a new one, right? That's very kind of the low end on the DIY, but maybe on the higher end, we see all the time doors being reused for different purposes, and things like that. um, but besides that, anytime that we think about designing, for a new space renovation, it's really important to think about how, if we're buying virgin materials, how we might be able to reuse them in the next iteration. And so, avoiding the adhesives and the sealants and the glues, all of that stuff makes it very challenging to reuse that material.
Mm.
And so when we think more about kind of the craftsman style joinery, or using nails and screws or clips to hold in materials for what it might be, then you can dismantle those things, or you can disassemble those things and reuse them maybe in a different configuration and have a second life.
Nice, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess the kind of not using glues and sealant and things is kind of also relates to kind of using more chemical-free materials.
It
I think you've talked a lot about healthy buildings.
Mhm.
So maybe you can talk us through, how we can improve, indoor air quality for guests and, avoiding those chemicals and how that can actually, provide a better stay for our guests and therefore, in theory, better reviews and more bookings for the future.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I work a lot in the commercial business, which is a little bit different than core
Mm.
residential. But I think in both cases, where it makes sense to be prepared for poor air quality events. And a lot of times, when we have, our filtration media, what we're talking about in our air quality, that we want to have an alternate standard for those poor air quality days to catch and protect us from like the high carbon events where we have like maybe a wildfire or something like that. It's from a residential side, thinking about um, what you put in that environment from a materiality standpoint is sometimes even more important, because a house can be pretty airtight and keep the windows closed. Um, so thinking about, and actually there's some really good scientific paperwork out of the Harvard School of Health that shows that the majority of air pollutants we're exposed to are from the indoors, and that's because we have usually we have such good filtration that it's like the recirculating of the air of what's
Mm.
already in there and off gassing. A big one is for like composite wood, anything that is the composite wood product, right? We want to make sure, especially if it's older, it's not subject to the new regulations where we have formaldehyde free, composite wood products. The other big one is, anything that is a volatile organic compound, a VOC, right? It's all off gassing. So again, that's adhesives and sealants. You'll want to spend the extra money on the VOC free and look for the emissions testing as well, to confirm that that's not going to continue to off gas through the course of its life. But also plastic products, right? Anything vinyl, those are all, full of what we call the red list chemicals of concern. Red list chemicals are the worst chemicals in the world, and they're all around us all the time. They're in all of our building products, and you
Mm.
can specify a space that is free of them, right? But it's challenging because you have to pay a lot of attention. So that's why we do a lot of consulting work around that. But having that disclosure, selecting materials that have what they call EPDs, environmental product declarations, or HPDs, the health product declarations, and seeing what the chemical inventory is and selecting materials that don't have those things. So like what are they? They're known carcinogens, so they could cause cancer, or they're reproductive toxins. They can disrupt those processes, or something called endocrine disruptors, and that disrupts the thyroid, which relates to also cognitive function, weight regulation, mood, and so we don't want any of those things in our spaces.
Yeah, of course not. It's quite interesting. Obviously, you, like as you said, kind of predominantly work in the commercial space, but and so maybe this doesn't necessarily translate to the residential space. But is there certification for kind of these elements for doing the work to kind of not have all these toxins around, right? Because I'm sure that hosts are thinking, well, I'd be interested in kind of trying to avoid some of them, but if I do the work and make the investment to avoid it, can I also kind of is there something that I can show and say that my property follows these standards, and therefore maybe I can champion myself as kind of being a bit more sustainable and having a healthy building.
Yeah, yeah. I think the closest, or the best one specifically for red list chemicals of concern would be the Living Building Challenge, and there is what they call
Mm.
a petal certification. And so this is the certification with the metaphor around a flower. When you think about a flower, it's rooted in one place, it's contextually local, it gets everything it needs from its environment, water, energy, the things that it needs, and food it needs to survive. So within that Living Building Challenge, there are 7 petals. Some of them I just already mentioned, but one of them is materials. And in the materials petal, a core imperative of that certification is red list chemical free strategy. It also looks at zero waste, right? How are you, creating a circular material strategy? But then other petals include beauty and delight, or sorry, beauty and education, and place. And so if you pursue something like a petal sort of materials petal certification, you're looking at a really focused strategy around chemical avoidance, but also thinking about, well, what are you doing to instill beauty, be contextually local, design the place so that it's sustainable and regenerative. These are all uh, really powerful marketing tools, right? Because a materials petal certified location in Newport Beach, California, where I am right now, is going to look very different than, uh, you know, um, um, Austin, Texas, right? Because the contexts of those spaces are different, right? And so you want to be, uh, you know, giving a nod and to what's that local feeling is in that vibe, and that's also huge
Mm.
marketing opportunity. Other certification programs, almost all of them now address EPDs and HPDs in some way. LEED is the foremost environmental certification program that there is, and there's one a LEED for homes and multifamily as well as commercial properties. And then WELL is a wonderful program that is really focused on the body. So if your core messaging is about that this project or this location, this property is going to be fundamentally designed to improve the whole health and well-being of the body, everything from the circulatory system to the musculoskeletal system, um, cognition, social integration. This, all of the things that a person needs to survive, both mentally and physically, and to really thrive. That's a great program. And then a similar program is Fitwell. And Fitwell is really thinking more about health and well-being, more around again, social interaction, active design, cardiovascular health. And there are, of course, material strategies in all of these that give credit for health and healthy material choices, but they don't do the full, red list, you know, um, uh, rigor that the Living
Mm.
Building Challenge does.
That makes sense. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One final question for you, I think, just around inclusive design, because I think you kind of touched on it slightly, but as hosts are thinking about kind of design their property for, more people, both in terms of kind of, physical disability, but also maybe neurodivergent guests, how are some of the ways that, hosts can be thinking about that as they create these spaces and think about kind of sensory friendly spaces as well?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love thinking about, or I love the idea that more people are coming to terms with inclusive design, seeking out more information. It really, I think, is the future fundamental baseline for great design because it's really all about access. And when we think about a person coming into a site immediately, like, do they feel that they're welcome there, that that space is for them, or is there something about even the approach to the door that is limiting? And that's like the first thing that we can think about. Am I immediately walking upstairs to and pulling a heavy door, or is it a meandering path through this great landscape and, like, an art, maybe an art sculpture or something that is already bringing me delight and creating a calm environment for me? That approach is just really important. But I think beyond that, when we think about neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and in particular, having clear line of sight once you're in the property. How do I get out? And this
Mm.
actually tiptoes or borders trauma informed design, right? But it creates anxiety in us if we feel like we're trapped, especially if we're neurodivergent. And so, how do I know and feel comfortable about my surroundings that I can navigate freely with confidence? That's a big part of just wayfinding without signage, right? We don't want to have a whole bunch of signs saying go here, go there. We want to naturally feel like we understand how to navigate the property. And sometimes you can do that with floor finishes. A lot of folks who are neurodivergent tend to look down when they walk, right? So, like, are you creating almost like a yellow brick road type? Not literally,
Mm.
but like, how do you find ways to direct folks that this room is going to lead this way, and it's okay, right? And then similarly, control. right? If we feel like we have control over our surroundings, that is really good at helping calm the mind and the nervous system. And again, thinking about, do I have lighting control that will allow me, dimmability depending on the nature of what I'm doing? Maybe even, be able to change the color temperature so we can tap into our circadian rhythm. Bright light in the morning and the warm light in the evening,
Mhm.
to kind of slow down that rhythm. All really important. Even thermal settings, right? Is everything intuitive, or do I have to, have some kind of, special app that maybe my phone doesn't work and now I don't know how to function? Then, like, perhaps that was a part of like the tech, sell for the space, but maybe it is off-putting to someone who is older or maybe doesn't know how to manipulate the device, right? So trying to think about how you can provide people with access and control of their space across all of those needs, is really important. And then, I guess really, when you come back to everyone, we're all looking for that indoor outdoor connection, right? How do I bring in that biophilia and have that nature calming, like slow down my heartbeat, and be able to just feel comfortable here. I mean, that's something that helps everyone feel at home.
Nice, fantastic. I think there's some great pieces to think about there. It's been fantastic exploring that with you, Stacey. It's been very enlightening. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Hospitable Hosts podcast. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and listen out for our next episode coming soon.